Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I just want to first introduce myself and then the other team members from Wise Resource Development before I turn it over to Brittany. My name is Tanya Wise. I'm founder and CEO of Wise Resource Development. And we are really pleased to be bringing you these free webinars that we host monthly. These are primarily geared towards smaller nonprofits, potentially, founder-led nonprofits, organizations that might be in startup phase, really with a goal of trying to give you tips on how to be successful with fundraising with limited resources. So I want to first just introduce the rest of our team that's on the call. We have Cortland Powers, one of our strategy partners, Melanie Carroll, another strategy partner. Rachel Ossie is a senior strategy partner. And then Brittany Bannon is the strategy partner that will be leading this workshop for us today. And so I'm super excited to turn this over to Brittany, one of our great team members that has been with us for a little over 2 years now. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Brittany to get us started on this workshop.
Well, thank you, everyone, and thanks for taking the time to join us today. As Tanya mentioned, my name is Brittany Bannon. I'm a strategy partner here, and I was going to say that I've been here a little over 2 years, so I'm just repeating that. Before we get started, I would love it if each of you could drop your name, your title, the organization you're with, and if you feel comfortable doing so, please share your biggest challenge as a small shop nonprofit organization. And if time allows us at the end, I'd love to discuss these challenges as well as any questions you may have. Just as a little background, and if you are new here, we are a team of fundraising professionals combined. We have a depth of experience working with all different sizes and shapes of nonprofits. We are really an extension of your team, and we pride ourselves in creating custom strategies to meet your organization's mission and needs. Some of the projects that we work on in collaboration with our clients include fundraising assessments, grant writing, development planning, capital campaigns, and recruitment for positions. So why are we here today? Well, if you are a small-scaled nonprofit organization, well, then this webinar was made specifically for you. Over the next 30-45 minutes, we will provide you with tips to achieve success and tips for growing your small organization. This morning, we're going to cover what classifies an organization as small. What is that magic number that categorizes your organization as small? Why small organizations rock? The saying is true, they are small, yet mighty. Your organization may be small, but it provides vital and critical services to our communities. And without it, there would be no food banks, domestic violence shelters, animal shelters, education opportunities, physical and mental health services, youth and senior groups, and the list goes on. And then lastly, tips for small organization success. Most importantly, and why most of you are here today, is to hear about some of these tips and how to make your small organization a success. So what is a small nonprofit? Who coined this and what evidence supports this? What do we mean by the term small nonprofit? When there is no actual standardized scale to measure nonprofit size. For today's webinar, we're going to use the definitions used by the IRS, where a 501c3 organization is classified by the size of their total assets, which cutoffs typically at 100,000, 500,000, a million, 10 million, 50 million, and greater than $50 million. Using these standards, small nonprofits are most commonly those having total assets of $500,000 or less. In the absence of a standard definition, let's consider small organizations as having 20 or fewer staff members and a large organization as having 100 or more. However, these ranges are subjective and can depend on where you live and the work your organization does. So why do small organizations rock? Well, they just do, for starters. Small but powerful isn't a statement often associated with nonprofits, but we are here today to highlight the advantages small nonprofits have over large nonprofits. Reasons that small teams and budgets help small charities play big when it comes to fundraising, and what we and even large nonprofits can learn from. Number one, they move and pivot fast. Thanks to smaller teams and increased trust in colleagues from closer working relationships, small nonprofit organizations are best at making decisions fast and getting the most out of an opportunity. Number two, they are connected to the community around them. Smaller charities have the benefit of working in the community and meeting with the people they exist for every day. Everyone from the receptionist to the CEO is able to talk to people impacted by the cause and share what they have learned with the wider team. They have powerful stories to share. It's also because of this more direct connection with the community that small nonprofits are some of the best storytellers you can ever meet. Through their increased interaction with beneficiaries and frontline staff, collecting and understanding stories is an everyday occurrence that means they're equipped for those tell me what you do moments. They're brilliant at stewardship. Small nonprofit organizations are great at stewardship because of their direct connection with supporters and beneficiaries. Their empathy and connection to people who make it happen means they will do almost anything to remind them that they're appreciated. They have more resources. The flip side of having more resources at a larger organization is that there can be more hoops to jump through in order to access those resources. At a smaller organization, getting approval for expenses such as event sponsorships or conference attendance could be as simple as asking one person. Another resource difference is staff capacity, which can affect the kind of work you do. In a smaller nonprofit organization, things may get done more quickly because they need fewer levels of approval, largely because there aren't a lot of levels in the first place. And lastly, they have more opportunities for learning and growth. At a larger nonprofit, individuals may have people to learn from, more steps to climb on the career ladder, and more resources for professional development. But working at a smaller organization may enable an individual to receive greater responsibility and opportunities to demonstrate capabilities faster than peers at larger organizations. Now on to the good stuff. Tips for small shop executive directors. Number one, make sure you have the right tools. Whether your organization has a whole team of employees or if you're flying solo, your time is valuable. Make sure your nonprofit has the tools it needs to get things done quickly and efficiently. If keeping Excel spreadsheets full of donor contact information or using handwritten expense ledgers works for you, that's wonderful. If those solutions don't work, there are services out there that can help you streamline your operations and make the most of every minute. Email services, client management systems, customer relationship management tools, event management tools, and other programs that let you create and manage tasks are great for keeping an organization of any size organized. If your organization finds an amazing service that will change the way you do business, don't overthink paying for a good product. Think carefully, assess the return you'll get on the investment, and make sure that you have the tools you need to do your job well. You'll be thankful you did. Here's a tip. Implement a dashboard tool and keep other parts of your operations simple. It's easy to overlook internal practices when you're building a nonprofit from the ground up, but it's important. Disorganization and complicated procedures can be confusing and will end up causing frustration and wasted time. Work on things like maintaining a straightforward filing system and make sure that all employees know how to use all your different fundraising and administrative tools. Consolidating donor information Keeping thorough reports and establishing easy to follow guidelines will help keep everyone in your office working as efficiently as possible. When you have these practices in place when you're small, it'll be easy to keep up with them when you've grown. Next, add personal touches. If you're a small or a brand new nonprofit, you might have a relatively small donor pool. Take advantage of its size by adding personal touches to thank you notes, email correspondence, and appeals. Try taking a few seconds to hand sign a thank you card, write a personal letter to major donors, acknowledge donors with their approval, of course, to be mentioned in a social media post, and pick up the phone and call past donors and thank them for their support. You never know where the conversation may lead. These simple steps can help with donor retention and will help build strong emotional connections that will last even after you grow. A tip here. You can add your own personal touch by customizing the email receipts your supporters receive immediately after they make a donation on your organization's website. Going back to, do you have the right tools? You can also use your reports to keep track of how often donors give to your organization, which can help single out major donors and help you decide how to make sure they stay involved. For more on this topic, feel free to check out a recent webinar on our WISE resource development page. There was a recent webinar about easy stewardship to keep donors in love. And it goes into a little more detail about this topic. Be smart about your board members. Among all of these tips you'll receive during this webinar, this probably stands out the most and can be sometimes the most painful. Building a good board can make or break your organization. It's important to put plenty of time and thought into selecting your board members and try to focus on adding individuals who will advocate for your nonprofit organization and will put in time and effort needed to make your mission a success. It's easy to fall into the trap of adding people to your board solely because of personal friendships, family ties, or political practicality. You can involve people in your organization in tons of different ways, but save the spots on your board for people who will work hard and use their connections to make your organization flourish. That being said, you're probably saying to yourself right now, well, that's way easier said than done. And I couldn't agree more. Finding those key player board members is a task in itself. When searching for the right board member, ask yourself, does this person have financial expertise? Do they have connections in the community? And are they familiar with individuals served by your organization? During the recruitment process, it's important that the organization is also vetting a candidate and cultivating the interest of the potential future board member. You may realize after several meetings or conversations that the candidate ultimately isn't a good fit as a board member and may serve better on a specific committee or task force or volunteer for the organization in another way. This is important for both parties to acknowledge whether the relationship is or isn't a good fit. It's completely okay to deviate from your original plan if it isn't what's best for the organization. Selecting a board member just because you don't want to hurt their feelings after having several conversations could ultimately leave the organization filled with a seat that in the end brings little to no help growing the organization. So when thinking about potential board members, think broadly. Think colleagues, think neighbors, think parents of your kids' classmates, think community officials, think academics, think former board members rolling off other like-minded organizations, think donors, and think volunteers. Taking it a step further, and a tip, set aside a brainstorming session as part of a board meeting or on a completely separate time where the acting board engages in a prospective board member activity where everyone sits around, writes down from their Rolodex or their iPhone who might be a good candidate. This activity may essentially strike up conversations among the board members that they weren't even aware of, common relationships. We're also busy just trying to do our day-to-day jobs and keep up with our roles in the organizations and other positions that we hold, that sometimes it's just a matter of setting aside the time to really think through the connections for those light bulbs to go off. We have to block everything out and focus on that. And that is a good activity that could help really hone in on those connections. Next, purposefully cultivate relationships internally and externally. Your team and your supporters are your best assets. There's an old saying that goes, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Each and every person involved in running your organization, from the executive director to the volunteers, can influence how successfully you can scale the organization. So, find good leaders and invest in your staff. From board members to committee leaders, your team leaders should be able to set good examples to members, volunteers, and supporters, as well as inspire others to follow in their footsteps. Your organization's leaders should be the type of people who can connect with both the communities you serve and the people who could potentially become donors or sponsors. Internally, at a smaller organization, it is easier to get to know your colleagues because you naturally end up interacting with everyone. Externally, small organizations have more opportunities to build relationships with the people they serve. At the smaller organization, staff often spend more time with volunteers and community members. Always seek to hire people who can think on their feet, solve problems creatively, and most importantly, communicate your group's messages effectively. And when it comes to your staff members, you should continually find ways to help your team grow. Host training seminars, provide performance reviews, and encourage your managers to mentor those that show interest and potential. To successfully grow your organization, you'll need to invest in your people that are working for your organization. By training your staff early on, you'll be able to develop talented people who can head leadership positions in the near future. Foster deeper relationships with your supporters. As your nonprofit continues to grow, you may find more people who are just as passionate about your cause as you and your team are. These supporters hold a lot of potential in taking your nonprofit organization to the next level. For example, you can ask volunteers to help when you need extra hands at a fundraiser event. That way, your core team can really focus on their tasks, and you'll be able to accomplish more. The takeaway here is to nurture these relationships and don't be afraid to delegate when help is needed. Trust them. That's what they're there for. They're there to help. Building real relationships extends beyond building a donor base. That's important too, but is only one of the many reasons that networking is so valuable. Establishing connections and influential people in your community can result in some valuable allies, and befriending local vendors and businesses can also be beneficial. Remember that donors don't necessarily have to donate money to your organization. Vendors who are enthusiastic about your cause may be willing to donate in-kind donations for services or products instead of cash. Be sure your relationships with allies and vendors aren't one-sided though. Be sure you repay them by acknowledging their involvement in a way that benefits them too. Of course, this is one of our favorites. It's build your case. If you're going to recruit allies, find donors, and build professional relationships, you'll have to be able to explain why your organization deserves support in the first place. More importantly, you'll have to be able to do so in a clear, concise, and compelling way. Nailing down your story and a powerful case for your mission is helpful in other areas too. Excuse me, including newsletters, website content, and any marketing materials the organization utilizes. A strong case for support will quickly become part of your nonprofit's brand. And at its core, the case should show how the donor can be the hero in transforming his or her community by making a philanthropic investment. Components of a case for support include the mission and the vision of the organization. Why does your organization exist? What is the problem you're trying to serve? And why should people care? The history and the background of the organization, the need, the problem your organization is trying to solve. This is where you provide evidence that the problem your organization is trying to solve does exist. Statistics and facts related to this problem are crucial and will help the reader feel the real problem. Response, explanation of your programs. You've told the reader the issue at hand, and now you provide them with how you are solving it. What are you actually going to do to solve the problem? And then outcomes, stories, and proof of impact. Donors want to know that they can make a real difference in the world by supporting your organization. This is where you show proof that what you are doing is not only working, but is worthwhile as well. Explain how you measure results. What are some of your previous year results? What are the impacts of the results on the individual served? And what are your goals moving forward? Include demographics your organization serves. What are the demographics? Excuse me, the age, gender, ethnicity, special groups, income level, county, cities your organization serves. Volunteers, staff, and board. Provide the reader with knowledge on your volunteers, staff, and board. How many do you have in each group, and how do they support your organization? How can companies support the organization through volunteer efforts? Take it a step further by providing a paragraph highlighting your top level staff executives and their credentials. Collaboration. Companies and other nonprofits your organization works with to provide your programs and services. Include your fiscal responsibility. This is where you highlight the organization's financial history, where most of their funds come from, and how most of the funds are spent, i.e. administration, programs, events, also where you can highlight the support received thus far. Request for funding. End your case for support, asking for the funds to support the programs you just described. If this is something your organization lacks a case for support and would like to explore more, well, you're in the right place. Among one of the many assets we here at Wise Resource Development bring to the table, as I previously mentioned, grant writing and building a case for support is a strategy we most commonly support organizations with. Wise Resource Development would be happy to set up a time with you to discuss further, as we'd love to be able to help you. So just let us know. You can send us an email, put it in the chat box, whatever you want. Next, focus on the organization's highest return on investment fundraising. Your organization's fundraising strategy should be diversified to be sustainable, but not spent chasing all the different methods of fundraising there are out there. A 2012 Bridgespan Group study showed that 144 nonprofits founded from 1975 onwards in the United States had gone from founding to making at least $50 million in revenue. Of the common traits shared by these major organizations, concentrated funding was one of them. This means many of the This means that many of the biggest nonprofits today honed in on one type of fundraising rather than diversifying efforts and wasting precious resources. If you are new and haven't quite figured out the best way to raise money for your organization, don't worry. Sometimes it takes months. It could even take years of trial and error to figure out what works best for your organization and where your support typically lies. However, there are ways to be smarter about this process. For one, you can focus on transformational fundraising rather than transactional. The latter is all about exchanging donors' money for something tangible. Think selling tickets to fundraising events or holding fundraising car wash or fun run or anything like that. Transformational fundraising involves establishing meaningful and long-lasting relationships with your donors. The trick is to find donors who truly connects with and believes in your cause. I'm going to take a drink for a second. Pause. Ultimately, transformational fundraising's advantage is that it's sustainable with the right strategy. The best way to go about it is to keep your donors and sponsors engaged. You don't just want them to believe in your mission and advocacy. You want them to see how their money is able to make a difference. So keep your supporters in the loop. Provide ample documentation of any progress made with their contributions, and always communicate with you and your beneficiaries' gratitude, as mentioned earlier. Create and maintain your brand. Your small nonprofit can make a big impression if you create strong branding. Your brand is more than your logo. Your brand simply is what people think of you when they hear your nonprofit's name. Your employees, your social media posts, your email appeals, all of those things and more are tied to your branding. Having a nice logo is great, and an appealing website are awesome too, but really think about what you want to convey about your nonprofit. Do you want to focus on transparency and accountability? What do you want to emphasize about your nonprofit's mission? If you want donors to remember one thing about you, what do you want them to remember? Take your answer and incorporate it into everything you do. Ideally, your brand will make you stand out and stick in people's memories. Choose your battles. Be selective about the projects you take on. Employees at small nonprofits usually wear many hats within the organization. You can help prevent burnout by being selective about the projects you decide to take on. I never get a tickle in my throat, and of course I am right now, so this is funny to me. Anywho, you can help prevent burnout by being selective about the projects you decide to take on. If you're already stretched thin by taking care of your nonprofit social media posts, for example, don't try and take on a new marketing campaign. If you're already overwhelmed while planning a golf tournament or a walkathon, don't all of a sudden decide, let's have a gala too at the same time or back to back. You get the idea. Think it through, spread it out, and make it a priority. Keep an eye on your employees and prioritize your projects to avoid overworking your staff. Taking care of them is critical. They're obviously the people that keep your organization running. Take a step back. Oops, excuse me. Don't get too comfortable once you've got your best practices and protocols laid out. Periodically, take a step back, take an unbiased look at your organization. What's working? What isn't? What gets donors excited? Are you meeting your goals? Should you have different ones? Is your technology outdated? Are your donors happy? What about your employees? Remember, your size of your organization makes you nimble, so to speak, and able to adapt to the ever-changing landscape of the nonprofit sector. So use that to your advantage. So we've come to the end of the tips, but I wanted to leave you with one final tip that's not included here. And that is learn from the professionals. Consider modeling your organization after a more successful one with similar goals if there are areas of your organization that you're struggling with. There's no shame in doing that. I mean, you want to see your organization succeed, and if you've seen others do it, why not? Observe what works for them, as well as the kinds of approaches that ultimately prove ineffective. So if possible, reach out to these bigger organizations and ask if you can interview them, take them to lunch, get to know them. Think of it as a mentor organization. More often than not, nonprofits are willing to help others establish themselves better. They oftentimes can play off of donors and maybe programs that they could partner together to have support from a potential donor and share that program support. You can network with others to share challenges and solutions with one another. Chances are they have experienced some of the same obstacles as you. Plus, you might even find opportunities to collaborate on a project, like I was saying, and gain support from a potential donor together. Two heads together is better than one. Another thing you can try is to look for a mentor or a coach outside of an organization. There's nothing wrong with asking for help, and who can better help you than an experienced consultant. So as you've heard, running small nonprofits is full of unique challenges, but also full of advantages. Using your size to your advantage can set you up for success, and we hope these tips can help. We have plenty of time left. Even with my cough, I thought we would be running out of time. So I'd like to open this up for questions. If you just want to chit chat with each other and share some of the challenges you're having as small nonprofits, we can hopefully help one another, and we can also provide our advice as strategy partners to help you get through these challenges. So, and a baby.
I was going to mention, Brittany, there were two folks in the chat who mentioned challenges they were having, one from Kayla Parker, and then the second from Tanya Stafford.
Okay. Can you tell me, sorry?
Yeah, so for Kayla Parker, she was asking about how to prioritize for the most impact. And I know that you touched a little bit on that in your presentation. So I didn't know, Kayla, if you had some follow-up questions around that, or if you wanted to kind of provide a little bit more detail about your specific kind of competing priorities, and maybe we can help you in that.
Hi. Yeah, sure. No, you definitely touched on what to sort of focus on. I am a part-time development director at a small nonprofit that has mostly part-time folks. And so when you mentioned wearing many hats, that resonated really, really well with me. I am not only a development director, I'm a volunteer coordinator, I am a marketing director. So sort of if there's any sort of research as to or best practices as to how to best find the high impact activities for a small nonprofit, because I know you guys mentioned finding those, and it could take a year or two to find them, like which ones really work for your nonprofit. But sort of what is the strategy there to find them? Because sometimes I feel like I'm throwing spaghetti at a wall and trying to see what sticks.
Tanya, do you have any feedback?
Yeah, sure. I'll kind kind of respond first and see if others have some suggestions. I think, as Brittany mentioned earlier, I think and especially in small nonprofits that are, we like to call staff in small nonprofits overworked and under-resourced. So I think everybody from our team has been there and understands the challenges with that. I think the biggest thing, that I would recommend around that is just asking yourself with every activity what the return could be for that activity. So I think especially when you have the multiple hats that you're wearing, this is even a bigger challenge for you because you're going to have lots of competing priorities for activities that do not necessarily bring resources into your organization. But I would constantly and regularly evaluate all time that you're spending to determine what are the resource goals and potential associated with that activity. And so, we like to really advise our clients to remember that I'll give you an example. If you're doing a special event and you're breaking even, or maybe even losing money on it, but it's a fun event and you kind of justify it by saying, well, we're raising awareness and we're bringing, more awareness and more people to our organization, or more people are learning about our organization because of this. If that's not translating to more resources, as in more volunteers through the door, more money through the door, that is not a good ROI. That is not a good use of your time. And you should redirect your time towards activities that will bring more resources through the door. So I think, what we like to do whenever we're working with an organization is look at what are their kind of assets that they have. So we like to look at how strong is their individual donor base? Are they giving frequently? How strong is their, grant writing program? How strong are the events? Is there good ROI in the event? So we really analyze every single strategy to determine what's the potential that could be leveraged, and then what's the ROI on that. So that kind of gives you an example of really evaluating the time that you spend to determine, is there going to be a return on that? Because when you have a limited amount of resources, every activity or resource needs to be leveraged to bring in more resources. I don't know if that's a little helpful, and if anybody else on the team has, or anybody else on the call has other suggestions.
I also just wanted to piggyback off of what Tanya was saying, that as you figure out, what works for your organization and what doesn't, also make sure you all have like a streamlined way of taking down and recording that information. So if something did work for you, why did it work? What tools did you use, or what resources that you had that made that work? If it didn't work for you, why didn't it work? Because you also don't want to look down the line a couple of years and then you're back trying to figure out, okay, what do we want to do to build out our fundraising strategy? And then you find yourself kind of coming back to the same ideas and not having some of that historical data to kind of inform some of your decisions to figure out, what you should spend your time doing and what you shouldn't. So also just making sure you have somewhere to put what you find as you go through that process.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Cortland, is just having that debriefing and taking the time to do that and tracking it. I just want to kind of reiterate that sometimes you can spend so much time almost really chasing squirrels or chasing lots of opportunities. And I think a good example of this is those, like when Mooyah has we'll give 5% of whatever, when people come to our restaurant on this one day and they say they're supporting your organization, we'll give you 5% of receipts. Those types of activities, you really have to determine when you look at how much time you're spending on them and how much resources, and when your return is like $1,000 or less, or maybe a couple of $100, those are not a good use of your times, but those are the types of kind of squirrels that will come your way, because lots of your supporters will suggest them, and they're like, because you're getting suggestions from people who want to help, who don't really necessarily understand what a time commitment and a resource suck those types of opportunities are. So instead of just chasing every opportunity that comes your way, really thinking through, is that the best use of our limited resources?
And also to go off of that, thinking about resources and thinking about assets, I think most of us who work for Wise Resource Development have been in leadership positions at small nonprofits, and we work with a lot of small nonprofits. And I would say one of the most common things that I hear are, board members will ask development directors or executive directors, well, how do we get Mackenzie Scott's contact information so that we can get a multi-million-dollar grant, right? And that seems to be not just Mackenzie Scott, but a lot of these, I would say, really large national foundations that are in the news. And I've seen people spend, again, a lot of time on what I would consider squirrel chasing there, going after these big fish without really looking to see, who do you have on your board that might work for a local bank that has a grants program that only you can apply for? Who do you know in your own community that you could work with to find funding for your programs that you're already doing, rather than spending a ton of time and effort going after groups that are probably never realistically going to fund you.
This was fantastic. Thank you guys so much. We the squirrel chasing we call shiny things. So I think this is a very universal feeling, is not chasing after those shiny things. So thank you. No, this was great. I'm going to have to start enacting sort of like a post-mortem to any and all major campaigns and events, because I think that's one thing we're probably lacking is reviewing how it went.
Yeah, and
sorry.
Okay.
I was just going to say, one of the small shops that I came from, they were really well known for a huge gala in Dallas. And one year they said, well, what else can we do? Like, let's switch it up. And decided to throw this random event on the wall, and didn't like really evaluate, the donors that they have, as to whether or not they would even give to something like that. And keep in mind, they were pretty much known for this one gala. So switching gears to something more casual was going to take, a lot of work. And it wasn't as successful. And, as an executive director, I'm sure you all know, it's hard to have those conversations, but it probably should have happened earlier, that this isn't a good fit for the organization. And that was a shiny object that quickly learned that it's just not who they are. So, really evaluating those events that come to everyone all the time as to whether or not they're going to pan out based off of your donors that you have.
Yeah, and I think to that point as well, I think we've probably, every single person on this call has had the experience of a board member coming to the table with a great idea of a fundraising event that y'all should do. And ironically, when it comes down to actually implementing it, they're nowhere to be found to support it or even attend that event. So I think, again, just evaluating every opportunity and not just jumping on board, an idea that a board member may have, but if, really also holding them accountable to, if you're, okay, that's a great idea, why don't you take the lead on that? And if it's going to fall through, then it's going to be, on their end. So I think that's another thing to just be careful to not fall into that trap as well. And so we do have, Rachel, did you have something to?
Yeah, I just wanted to say one more thing, which is really think about what you're already doing and brainstorm about how you could supplement those things that you already have on your calendar, rather than creating new work for yourself. So if you have an event already on the calendar, how could you get those individuals who are on your mailing list that lead foundations? Could you invite them so they can see things firsthand? Rather than, as a a small shop person scheduling 100 different meetings to raise awareness. I mean, are there ways that you can condense a lot of the things that you could potentially separate into separate meetings into one event? You know, if you're going to be inviting people for some sort of volunteer day, is there a way that you could also let them know what's an easy way to donate to your organization, or pass out information on employee matching? You know, I think every opportunity that you have to have a conversation with somebody, or to get somebody involved, there's always one more thing that you could probably do on that day instead of making more work and more time for yourself at a different time.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Rachel, because I think, you know, my very first fundraising job, I worked at the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. I had 8 events a year that I managed on my own with volunteer support. And I think what was hard for me in that job was I felt like I couldn't fully leverage any one of those events. Like there was so much more that could be done with each event if I just had more time to spend on it. So just exactly what Rachel said, are you fully leveraging your greatest assets and maximizing the potential with each of those? Because if that's your first priority. And only when you feel like you've completely maxed out the potential of your current fundraising activities and assets, then you should be looking at what do we do to expand into the next realm. And we have one other question that came up in the chat that I want to spend a little time on, and that's from Tanya Stafford about reactivating annual fundraisers since COVID. So I'm assuming this is a fundraising events and reactivating those since COVID. I don't know if Tanya's still on here.
I'm still here.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
So the challenges that a lot of us have been facing is, so we have an annual gala that's always in January. So the costs have went up. So the space is always donated, but the cost for the food and beverages have went up. And now the challenge is getting someone to sponsor the event with the prices that have soared. So it's reactivating the fundraisers that we already had in place. And a lot of organizations have been canceling the events due to the cost.
So are you talking about the sponsorship levels have gone up, and so because of that you're not getting your sponsors back? Or are you talking about specifically the expenses of the event?
The expenses of the event. So the Hyatt usually hosts us for the gala, and so they sent us an email saying that the food and the beverages costs have went up, skyrocketed. So the plates are no longer $25 or $35. They're going from $50 to $60 a plate. So the only cost that we would be out of is the food, but it's really high now.
What was your previous ticket cost or what were you charging for tickets for the event?
$150, and the tables were $1,500. Sponsorship level started at about $2,500.
Okay. So are you talking about increasing the sponsorship levels even though or because your expenses have gone up and that's where the challenge is?
Yes.
Okay.
That will be the challenges because everybody is not either working or can't afford it. So I've been going to different events that have been suffering the same challenges, to where they're giving away the tables. Like I went to an event about a week ago, and it was an anti-human trafficking event. So they ended up giving away most of their tables because they couldn't sell the tickets.
Yeah. Does anybody have thoughts on that? I want to pitch it out first.
I'm still kind of thinking on it, just with my experience kind of doing the virtual event thing at the top of COVID. So have you all ever tried to do a virtual host, like a virtual fundraiser versus an in-person due to the high cost of the food and beverage?
Virtual really wouldn't work for us because what we do, we have all of the survivors of human trafficking that we have rescued over the years, and they all attend this gala. So all of our sponsors and funders, they come to the gala, they get to see the survivors, that where their money goes and different things like that. So virtual, the board had voted that virtual doesn't work for us in person. So previous years, we got sponsors to donate all the dresses, makeup artists to come in. They do the young ladies' makeups, whatchamacallit, donate all the dresses. So it's like one of our biggest events where virtual doesn't work for us.
Do you have primarily corporate or individual sponsors?
Both.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Of your partners who have done like the makeup and the dresses and everything, are you seeing any resistance from them, or do they seem to be coming back? Is your biggest challenge the food component, like just getting a sponsor for that piece, or are you seeing across the board challenges getting your previous sponsors and supporters to commit?
The donors for the dresses, makeup artists, shoes, they are still in place. They
Okay.
don't mind. I think our challenge now is getting someone to do the food sponsors, the
So,
drink sponsors, and different things like that.
so
Gotcha.
one thing I just want to encourage you to think about a little differently is, people often utilize the term underwriting, which and I like the fact that you're using sponsorship and not underwriting as a term. I think they're not really interchangeable. Underwriting implies that you're trying to find a company or an individual to pay for an expense. Underwriting is very attached to an expense, and that often brings up conversations around, how much does the food cost, or how much does do the drinks cost, which are really unnecessary conversations when it comes to sponsorship, because sponsorship is based on the value of that, whether it's the marketing or the benefit value of that sponsorship. And so that in and of itself, really needs to be tied towards kind of the marketing and or other kind of benefits associated with that level. So I think what might be helpful is, and I think, we'd be happy to look at your sponsorship levels and see if we have any suggestions around that, just to make sure you're kind of maximizing how you're positioning that from a, that perspective. The other thing I would just suggest is maybe thinking outside the box. So it sounds like the Hyatt has historically, been a cost-effective option for you, and now it's not. So you might want to consider, other venues and options that might be more within your budget. Because I think one of the things that is important with events is, sometimes they become unviable. So, you have to always evaluate, is this really a good, return on investment of the resources into this? Can we continue to make this event viable? And it sounds like it's a beloved event. There's a lot of emotional commitment towards the event, and that's really common for nonprofits, boards, supporters to have that, where they love the event itself for the meaning around it. And so that can be really hard to have what feel like kind of cold evaluation situations around that event, where you're trying to evaluate whether or not it's really continuing to be a viable investment of your resources if there's not going to be a return on that. So I would say, well, as hard as that is to do that, you may want to do some numbers crunching and evaluate whether or not you really, this is an event that you can continue to do, or do you need to put it off another year and reevaluate whether or not it's really financially viable.
Mhm.
That's just a couple of thoughts that I have. Does anybody else have thoughts for Tanya?
I mean, I was gonna say, which I'm sure you have. I mean, I would think that this is probably a given in negotiating with them. Have you told them that these prices won't work and we're gonna have to move it? Because I mean, if they're raising their prices, they need people to come into the hotel. They need
Mhm.
clients. So if you leave, they're worse off after than they were before. I mean, I'm sure you've probably negotiated that, but almost
I've talked
a
to
simple
her.
little threat.
Yeah, I've talked to her, and basically she's saying, okay, we'll still donate the space. The food, she's saying, the since the economy is like it is, that they have to raise the cost. And so I haven't really responded back to her emails about, trying to we've been trying to negotiate the price of the food. And like I forgot who that was speaking before. We have said that we will, maybe put it off another year, because this was going to be our fifth one. It was going to be the biggest one.
Mhm.
We had already had things in place post COVID, and so when COVID hit, we had to cancel all events. I mean, well, all events were canceled. And then when all the events started picking back up is when she reached out to us and said, okay, we still have your date available, but the food, the beverages, see if you can get a food sponsor and a liquor sponsor and different things like that. And it's like,
Yeah, it sounds like they're kind of turning their problem into your problem. What I would do
yeah.
is look at your budget and determine
Mhm.
how much you have to spend on food and
Mhm.
beverage, and that's
Mhm.
your cap. And they can either work with you to, to hit that number, or you might want to just start looking somewhere else. Because there's actually what they're doing about, donating the space.
Mhm.
That's what hotels do. They give away
Exactly.
space because they
Mhm.
make the money on food and beverage. So what they're doing for
Exactly.
you is not any kind of a deal just for you. Like that's how
Exactly.
they do. So
Mhm.
so they're really not, they're trying to strong arm you in this situation. So I would, like I said, evaluate what you have max to spend, and they can either meet you there, or, there are plenty of other venues that I'm sure will be willing to do that.
It's finding the venue that would accommodate us,
Yeah,
because we usually bring out around about, I think, about 450 to 600 people.
yeah,
And it's one of the biggest events that we have, and it's like amazing,
yeah,
and everybody loves it. It's a Hope and Pearls gala, and
yeah,
everybody loves it because the young ladies that are survivors of
Absolutely.
trafficking are
yeah,
there to be honored that night. This is the first time that they've been dressed up to not be sold,
yeah.
and to
It
dress
sounds,
up to be catered to.
yeah, it sounds like a really special event, and I know we're running out of time, so I'm gonna just suggest that if you want to talk through this a little further, and you want us to really help you think through kind of that strategy, please feel free to reach out to probably me by email. I'm going to drop my email in here, and then we'll kind of see how we might be able to just give you some some suggestions around it. Just
Okay, yes, I would love
yeah.
that. Thank you. I
Um,
didn't mean to take up everybody's time. Thank you.
yeah, no, yeah, these are the types of real life challenges we know you're facing. So would be happy to look at your budget and help you kind of do some numbers crunching, or make
Okay.
suggestions around your sponsorship levels, things like that.
Okay.
But yeah, thank you for bringing that question to us, and thank you everybody for being on the call today. Appreciate you, Brittany, for leading this topic, which is I think, really beneficial to so many of our clients and other nonprofit leaders in our community. This is our next webinar, November 9th. So please mark your calendars. It'll be led by Melanie Carroll, but we'll continue to have these regularly and just encourage you to participate as the topics pique your interest. So thank you everybody for being here today.
Thank you.